They shoved her off the cliff hard, then laughed as she vanished over the edge. No scream, no struggle, just boots grinding gravel and then nothing. They thought it was over. No rope, no backup, no chance. A fall steep enough to erase a body and a witness. But what they didn't know was that Navy SEALs don't need ropes to climb. Because she didn't fall. She climbed, bleeding, broken, furious, up the same cliff they tried to bury her under, coming back with a knife and a plan to burn their entire operation to the ground. Before we show you how Lieutenant Commander Mara Ellison turned a mountain into a war zone, make sure you're subscribed with the bell icon on, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Because this wasn't a story about falling. This was a story about rising on will alone. The mountain itself didn't echo when it happened. It just went silent. One moment, Mara was moving carefully across a narrow ridge. Boots angled into loose shale, eyes scanning the altitude markers, and the next she was airborne. She'd felt it half a second before. The wrong kind of silence behind her. Not the focused kind. The coiled kind. The kind men make right before violence. She started to turn, then hands slammed into her back. No warning. No shout. Just sudden weightlessness and the cold rush of air as gravity yanked her off the ridge. She didn't scream. Not because she wasn't terrified, but because instinct was louder. Her hands clawed for anything. A root, a rock, a miracle. She found a jagged outcrop no wider than her forearm. Her shoulder hit first, then her knee, then her hip, then mercifully stillness. She lay sprawled on the ledge, chest heaving, blood running down her temple. Her left boot hung into emptiness. Above her, faint voices drifted down. Amused, careless. Well, damn. Cleaner than I expected. Think she's dead. She will be. Nobody climbs back from that without a rope. More laughter. Then silence. Mara blinked up at the darkening sky. Dusk in the Balkans hit fast. The cold would follow even faster. But her mind was already working through pain, shock, and betrayal. They pushed me. Not metaphorically. Not politically. Physically. The 3 private contractors she'd been embedded with for 6 days, part of a NATO logistics drill, had just tried to kill her. Not an accident. Not fear. A decision. She tasted dirt as she shifted, something crunching in her ribs. The ledge beneath her was barely big enough to lie on. Below her, a 150-foot drop into black forest. One wrong twitch. That was all it would take. But instead of panic, calm settled into her bones. She checked her gear. A cracked carabiner. A broken strap. But her belt rig was intact. A half coil of climbing cord still hung from her hip. Her sidearm was gone, swallowed by the ravine. But the climbing knife strapped to her calf remained. Alive. Hurt, but alive. Which made her a problem for the men above. They thought she'd die quietly. They thought gravity would finish the job. They didn't understand who Mara Ellison was, or what she'd been trained to do when everything, even the mountain, turned against her. She pulled herself inward, breath ragged, and whispered to the stone beneath her, "They're going to wish I didn't survive this." Then, slowly bleeding, she began to climb. Pain pulsed hard behind her eye. Fire burned along her ribcage. Her left thigh throbbed where the stone had torn through fabric and skin. But Mara Ellison had been hurt before. Dropped from helicopters. Broken in sear drills. Waterboarded until she forgot her own name. Pain didn't stop her. It reminded her she was still in the fight. She looked up. 20 feet of jagged cliff stared back at her. She could see where she'd been shoved. The cracked trail edge, gravel still sliding. They hadn't even looked down. They just assumed the fall would finish her. But Mara wasn't finished. She tested each limb. Right arm functional. Shoulder aching but usable. Left leg damaged, but it moved. It would have to. She pressed her boots into the stone and searched for handholds. Not clean ones, scraps of texture, thin cracks, anything the cliff would allow. Then she saw it. A rusted bolt embedded in the rock. Old. Forgotten. A Cold War-era anchor from SEAL mountaineering drills. The mountain had a memory. She looped her belt like a makeshift harness and used the leftover cord, not to rappel down but to climb up. Her boot slipped. She caught herself with a gasp. "Not today," she whispered. Every inch upward was earned. Every pull screamed through her ribs. But she didn't stop. She remembered an instructor at Coronado once cutting her rope mid-climb and yelling, "A SEAL climbs with or without a rope, Ellison. What are you, equipment or operator?" She never answered then. She didn't need to now. She just kept climbing. The cliff didn't care she was bleeding. Didn't care she'd been betrayed. It simply waited to see who would fall next. Mara Ellison wasn't planning to be that person. Her boots scraped against the granite as she pulled herself higher, fingers searching for cracks and edges that could hold her weight. She moved slowly, not out of fear but strategy. One wrong grip and gravity would win again. She paused at a narrow ledge barely wider than a rifle stock, wedging her hip against the wall to ease the pressure on her injured leg. Her breathing came in sharp, controlled bursts. Her fingers were split open in 3 places, dirt and blood streaking across her knuckles. And still she climbed. In the stillness, she heard her father's voice. Not from Coronado, but from Colorado. He'd taken her to the San Juan Range when she was 13. First real mountain. No guide, no ropes, just her dad and whatever they carried. She'd slipped near the top, panicked, froze. He didn't yell. He didn't reach down. He just said, "Cliffs aren't walls, Mara. They're tests. They only stop the people who stop themselves." Back then she thought it was just something a dad said to keep a kid moving. Now she knew better. She pushed off the ledge and climbed again. The climb wasn't just survival anymore. It was reclamation. The mercenaries hadn't just tried to kill her. They'd stripped her of control, tried to dump her into the dark like disposable gear. That ended now. 30 feet. 20. 10. She could smell the pine line. Resin thickened the air. The ridge was close. Her final pull nearly sent her falling. Her boot slipped, and for a split second she dangled sideways, held only by one hand locked around a rusted bolt. She screamed, not in fear but fury, and threw her other hand up blindly. Fingers hit earth, gravel, grass, the edge. She clawed herself over the ridge like a ghost dragging itself out of the underworld. Then stillness. Mara lay flat on the ground, chest heaving, cheek pressed into cool dirt. The stars sharpened into view. But there was no time to celebrate. 100 yards across the ridge, faint orange firelight flickered behind the trees. Voices, laughter. She rolled to a shallow rise and peeked through the brush. A full field camp. Crates stacked, radios buzzing, rifles leaning against tents. No NATO protocol, no discipline. This wasn't a joint training op. It was a cover. Arms, ammo, trafficking, logistics disguised as relief aid. And her intel access had made her a problem. They hadn't pushed her because of a disagreement. They pushed her because she saw this. She slid deeper into the shadows. Now she had the high ground. Mara moved low, circling wide around the camp, using darkness the way others used walls. Every step calculated. Every pause strategic. SEAL training lived in her bones. You don't outrun an enemy, you outthink them. She knelt behind a moss-rimmed boulder and listened. Still no response from the outpost. Probably drunk. Load the rest before dawn. Convoy hits the NATO checkpoint at 0600. The voices were careless. Why wouldn't they be? In their minds, she was a corpse cooling on a cliffside shelf. She scanned the camp. 6 men visible. 2 lazy perimeter walkers. 1 smoking near the crates. A cluster of supply boxes labeled as aid, medical relief, winter rations, water filters. But she recognized the container design. Military weapons crates with fake stencils. Classic black market logistics. She counted at least 3 crates ready to load onto a beat-up transport truck, its gate sagging under the weight. Nearby, 2 duffel bags lay open, unmarked rifles visible beneath a tarp. The operation was bigger than she realized. They didn't push me because they disliked me. They pushed me because I saw this. Her jaw clenched. She ducked behind the boulder as her earpiece crackled. Static at first, then a voice. Confirmed. She went over. No body, but no movement since. She'll be bones by morning. Smug, confident. They didn't need to confirm a kill when gravity did the work. That was how these men operated, clean, detached, no evidence, just empty ground where a person used to be. She eased around a patch of dry needles as one merc unzipped a field satchel. Inside were communication maps, NATO corridor schedules, transit logs, encryption keys. But what stopped her cold was the photograph clipped inside the flap. A surveillance photo of her, taken 3 days earlier outside the NATO logistics tent. Someone had been tracking Mara long before this mission. The push wasn't spontaneous. It was the objective. They'd embedded with her team for one reason: get her alone on this ridge, make her disappear, keep their operation invisible. And her death would have erased the intelligence chain needed to expose it. That made her dangerous, and they had no idea. Mara slipped into deeper cover, circling the camp again. She had seen everything: the lazy patrol, the unsecured fuel drums, the poorly placed munitions. They felt untouchable. They had no idea the woman they tried to bury was already planning to dismantle their entire operation. Tonight, they'd made 3 mistakes. First, they thought the mountain killed her. Second, they thought they could sleep without a real perimeter. Third, they stored too much fuel too close together. Mara waited until the camp went quiet. Midnight in the highlands meant freezing wind and half-awake mercenaries buried in blankets, sipping canned coffee. She used the cover. Crawling down the embankment, she slipped behind the supply tent. No guard. Perfect. Fuel drums sat in sloppy rows behind the flap. Triple-sealed plastic, close enough that one spark would chain them together. She didn't need a firestorm, just a message. She pulled a strip of det cord from her thigh pouch, taped it between the drums, looped it over a support stake, and slid a friction primer into place. Then she moved, shadow to shadow, silent, breathing steady. Her first target slept near the truck, AK across his chest, boots off. Mara stepped forward like falling dust. One arm around his throat, one hand over his mouth. 6 seconds. Then nothing. She dragged him behind the truck, grabbed his radio and ammo belt, and moved on. In a tent by the fire, 2 men played cards under a red lamp. Think they'll pay extra for what we lifted off that Slovak depot? Nah. Once the cargo crosses the border, we're ghosts. She didn't hear the rest. She was already heading toward the ridge line. At the top, she paused, pulled out the waterproofed lighter from her vest, lit the primer, and vanished into the dark. The explosion wasn't thunderous, but it didn't need to be. It was sharp, fast, loud enough to wake the camp, precise enough to avoid collateral damage. One fuel drum burst. Fire licked the edge of a tent. Screams followed, then gunfire. Panic, orders shouted with no enemy in sight. She's alive. No way. No one climbs out of that fall. You think anyone else could have done this? Mara Ellison crouched beneath the ridge, watching the chaos unfold. Fear cracked them open faster than any bullet. They hadn't buried her. They'd resurrected her. And now they'd have to live with the ghost they created. Fear is louder than gunfire if you know how to use it. Mara crouched inside the treeline, clothes soaked in dirt, blood, and smoke. The fire she'd started was already dying, but its real purpose had already spread. Paranoia. Inside the camp, shouts echoed through static-filled radio calls. She's alive. We saw her go over. Well, you didn't hear her scream, did you? Silence followed that. Mara tapped the stolen radio to life, switching to their command channel. Same encryption pattern she'd cracked during recon 6 months ago. These men weren't clever, just cocky, lazy with their signals. Her voice came low and distorted across their frequency. You should have checked the ledge. That was all she gave them before cutting transmission. In the tent nearest the smoldering fuel drums, 2 mercs froze mid-conversation. Did you hear that? The other paled. That was her. She's talking to us. Mara smiled through cracked lips. Talking was just the beginning. She spent the next 20 minutes preparing her next message. Using the last of her climbing cord, she rigged 2 pressure snares into the slope beyond the loading area. Standard field traps, crude but effective near high-traffic paths. Then she took a risk. Slipping close to the gear trailer, she sliced one truck's cargo strap, coiled it into a noose, and tied it to a low branch above the ledge where she'd almost died. Poetic. If anyone chased her down that path, they wouldn't be coming back up. She left a single boot print pointing that direction. Obvious, almost too obvious. But they'd follow it anyway. Men like these were hunters, not planners. They believed in force, not caution. And now fear made them predictable. Across the ridge, a voice boomed. "We need to regroup. Reset patrols. She's wounded. She won't last till morning." But the voice cracked on wounded. They were lying to themselves now. A scream sliced through the dark. Not Mara's. A merc had stepped into one of her snares, rope tightening around his ankle, yanking him into a tree. Bones snapped. Then a gunshot, one of his own trying to silence him. Too late. Panic had already rooted itself. Another man saw movement in the trees and opened fire, emptying half a magazine into nothing. Where is she? She's everywhere. No, she was just one woman. But in their minds, she was already something else. Mara keyed the radio one more time. "You didn't kill a SEAL. You unchained her." She killed the line. But she wasn't done. She circled toward the camp's eastern perimeter. The communications tent sat isolated. 2 guards posted outside, both facing inward, watching the chaos instead of the dark woods behind them. Rookie mistake. Mara moved through the treeline, slipped behind the tent, sliced a vertical slit through the canvas, and stepped inside. The radio setup was more advanced than she expected. Encrypted satellite uplink, frequency hopping channels. Someone with deep pockets was backing this operation. She pulled a small device from her vest, a signal interceptor she'd been carrying since her briefing in Sivo. 30 seconds to clone their encryption. Another 20 to upload the data burst to her secure channel. If she didn't make it off this mountain, at least naval intelligence would have every message they'd sent in the past week. Boots approached outside. She didn't rush. She pocketed the device, slipped out through the slit, and vanished into the trees before the guards even turned around. When they discovered what she'd done, it wouldn't matter. The damage was already complete. By the time dawn brushed the ridgeline in pale blue, the camp had unraveled. Gear scattered. Half the men gone, dead, trapped, or missing. Those who remained huddled near the fire, rifles shaking, eyes darting at every shadow. And in the center, barking orders like a wolf surrounded by pups, stood Krueger. Mara recognized the type, scarred, barrel-chested, an old-school mercenary with too many tours in too many uniforms. And now, he was the last man in this place who still believed he was in charge. Krueger was probably ex-Foreign Legion or South African Recon, the type who mistook discipline for brutality. A man who believed fear could replace strategy. Now, fear was consuming him instead. He stood near the central crate, gripping a suppressed pistol, snarling into a dead radio. No one was answering anymore. "She's bluffing. She's wounded. We own this ridge," he growled. No response. Not from his men. Not from his employers. Not from whatever ghosts the night had left behind. Mara Ellison stepped into the clearing without a sound. The remaining mercs didn't see her until she was already walking toward them. Blood-soaked, silent, rifle slung over one shoulder, knife glinting in her hand. Krueger turned. He blinked once, then lifted his pistol. Mara didn't flinch. "You can't kill us all, Carter," he said, voice thick with anger. She didn't smile. She just kept walking. At 10 feet, she let her rifle fall to the dirt. The metal struck stone, sharp, deliberate, final. "Let's finish it," she said. He nodded. The mercs didn't interfere. They stepped back, as if even they understood something sacred and violent had just begun. Krueger lunged first. For a man his size, he was fast. Military knife slicing sideways toward her ribs. Mara spun under the strike, caught his wrist, drove her knee into his gut. He stumbled, swung again. This time the blow hit her shoulder, blunt, jarring, but she absorbed it. She twisted low, cracked her forearm into his throat, and he wheezed hard. They grappled. He outweighed her by nearly 40 pounds, but she was faster. Her attacks were precise, surgical, born of years in killhouse training and silent elimination drills. He fought like a brawler. She fought like a blade. They slipped through ash and dirt, crashing into crates and tent poles. He grabbed her vest strap and tried to slam her into the ground. She rolled with the momentum, turning his strength against him. Both of them skidded near the ridge, the same ridge he'd thrown her from the night before. Only now he was the one on the edge. Her knife rested at his throat. He froze. Mara didn't press the blade. She just stared at him until the cracks in his bravado showed. He breathed heavily, blood dripping from his mouth. "Who hired you?" she asked. Krueger hesitated, then laughed, bitter and broken. "What does it matter? They'll just send someone else." "No," she said. "They won't. Not after what I send back." She grabbed the rope from his own pack, his climbing gear, and bound his wrists and ankles with the same knots he used to teach rookies how to escape from. He wasn't laughing anymore. "Make sure your clients know this," she said as she dragged him away from the cliff. "When you push a SEAL off a ridge, make damn sure they don't climb back up." The flare hissed into the morning sky, a red warning shot spiraling through the cold alpine air, visible from 50 kilometers away, including to the NATO patrol Mara had tracked on satellite 2 days earlier. If they were on schedule, they'd be passing the valley floor any minute. She didn't even need 10 minutes. The low thump of rotor blades broke across the ridgeline. A NATO Blackhawk emerged over the treetops, sunlight flashing across its canopy as it angled toward her position. Mara Ellison stood near the edge of the clearing, one hand gripping the rope binding Krueger's wrists, the other holding a field tablet she'd pulled from his tent. It was loaded with route schedules, fake manifests, and proof of high-level coordination between the mercenaries and at least one NATO logistics officer. Her body ached, her shoulder throbbed, dried blood streaked her face, but she stood tall. 2 soldiers dropped from the Blackhawk side doors before the skids even touched the ground. Helmets down, rifles up, scanning the chaos. "Lieutenant Commander Ellison?" one of them called, unsure. Mara gave a single nod and stepped forward, dragging Krueger behind her like dead weight. "Alive and uncooperative," she said. "Tag him before he talks his way out of treason." The NATO team exchanged looks. They clearly hadn't been briefed. Probably told this was a field test or a communication error, the usual cover story NATO used when something embarrassing slipped through the cracks. She tossed the tablet to the nearest officer. "That's the real story." The soldier scrolled, eyes widening as the truth unfolded. Maps, codes, convoy routes marked for interception, even a spreadsheet of black market payouts in euros. A junior officer, maybe 25, climbed out of the tail ramp. He looked from Mara to the cliff edge, then to the burned-out mercenary camp behind her. "We thought you fell," he said quietly. Mara turned, voice steady. "SEALs don't fall. We climb." The moment hung in the cold morning air. She walked toward the helicopter without another word, leaving Krueger in the dirt. He groaned as NATO soldiers cuffed him properly, one muttering something that sounded like a curse. Mara didn't look back. She didn't need to. She'd already won. The Blackhawk lifted into the pale sky, rotor wash scattering pine needles and ash across the clearing like discarded metals. Mara sat near the open bay door, legs heavy, hands freshly bandaged. The combat medic had insisted on wrapping her palms and shoulder before takeoff. She didn't argue. Silence was enough. Below her, the ridgeline shrank into mist. The same ridge they'd pushed her from, the same ridge she'd clawed back up with broken ribs and bare hands. She didn't stare at it with anger or pride. Just recognition. That was where they chose to kill her, and it was where she chose to rise. Beside her, Krueger sat strapped down, mouth taped, arms pinned behind him. His eyes flicked toward her once, searching for pity, fear, negotiation. He found nothing. Mara's gaze stayed fixed on the horizon. For crates were strapped in the cargo bay, evidence the medic called them. But Mara knew better. They were more than evidence. They were leverage. Proof. The reason her command would finally learn the truth. And the reason this operation wouldn't vanish into classified paperwork. The pilot's voice crackled through the cabin comms. Base confirms receipt of your signal. Debrief as soon as we land. Hold tight, Commander. She didn't answer. She simply closed her eyes and rested her head against the fuselage. She didn't need to speak anymore. Everything that needed to be said had already been written in blood, stone, and silence on that ridge. And now the question was yours. Could you climb your way back when everyone else thought you were finished? And when betrayal comes from your own side, what do you do then? Let me know in the comments below. I read everyone. If the story reminded you why Navy SEALs are never truly out of the fight, smash that like button, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss what happens when the odds flip. And if you know someone who needs to remember that SEALs don't quit, they climb, share this video with them. Your next mission is already on the screen. Go watch it now. I'll see you tomorrow, same time, with a brand new story.